Okay, let's go ahead and begin. All right. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Cannabis Regulation Commission meeting. Today is Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. The time now is 2:07 p.m. I'm President Robert Ahn, and I'll be chairing this meeting. And the following commissioners have also joined this meeting virtually via Zoom. We have Vice President Mason, Commissioners Mercado, Naro, and Villa. DCR's Executive Director, Kat Packer, has also joined this meeting, along with members of the department and the City Attorney's Office. I'm going to go over some general instructions before we start the meeting today. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being conducted virtually via Zoom and is being live streamed on DCR's website. Individuals who wish to watch this meeting may do so by visiting cannabis.lacity.org and clicking the About menu button on the top of the page. Under the About menu, click the Commission Meetings link, scroll down to the bottom of the Commission Meetings page to find the live stream. You can also listen to this meeting by calling council phone at 213-621-2489 or 818-904-9450 and selecting the number for this meeting. Members of the public who want to offer public testimony and comment may call one of the two toll-free numbers at 877-853-5257 or 888-475-4499 and enter meeting ID 860-838-7310. These numbers can also be found on the agenda for this meeting. Agenda for today's meetings can be found on the department's website at cannabis.lacity.org and navigating to the commission page under the About menu. This meeting is being recorded, therefore we ask commissioners, staff, and all members of the public to please state your name clearly before you speak. The audio file will be posted online within 48 hours of the meeting. If you're in the Zoom call, when the item you wish to speak on is called, press *9 to get on the speaking queue. You will then be called out by each speaker and their last four digits of their phone numbers to identify the caller. The caller will be prompted to unmute themselves by dialing *6. If there are no other items you wish to speak on, you may disconnect from this call and view the meeting via live stream or dial council phone to listen only. We will be following the agenda order. Today's presentation to the Commission will be available on the department's website within 2 business days from this meeting. We will consider general public comment and single or multiple agenda items together. Each speaker will have 1 minute for general and 1 minute per item with a maximum of 2 minutes for multiple items. We ask that speakers state whether they're providing general comment and or which other item or items they are speaking on before they begin to comment, so the staff can appropriately time them. If the speaker does not specify which items they are speaking on, only 1 minute will be provided. With that, we'll go ahead and open up the general public comment and single or multiple agenda items. Speakers can address the Commission on non-agenda related items that are within the jurisdiction of the Commission only, or provide public comment for items in today's agenda by dialing *9 on your phone. If you're listening on the live stream and you have called to provide public comment, please mute the live stream audio before you begin speaking to eliminate feedback. Commissioners and staff, please mute your microphones. Ms. Treviso, please call the first speaker.
Sure. Caller with phone number ending in 6760. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on. That caller drop. Caller with phone number ending in 8897. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Good afternoon, Commission and all members, everybody, stakeholders listening in. My name is Alfred Torregano. I want to speak on general public comment and actually number 3 as well.
Sure, you have 2 minutes.
Again, my name is Alfred Torregano. I'm the Vice President of the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association. I'm a verified social equity applicant, entrepreneur, and advocate for cannabis. Really simple here today. The DCR issued a report in response to the motion. It contains critical recommendations that are not addressed by the City Council's motion. And we are in favor of the DCR's proposal to a refiling process for applicants who are unable to move forward with their existing application and the elimination of predatory supermajority voting provisions that create harmful side letter backdoor deals. And additionally, we believe the city's motion currently drafted creates unintentional negative impacts, specifically the lack of oversight for predatory agreements and the dismantling of the cannabis licensing oversight to the detriment of public health and safety with total disregard to the LAMC. We are concerned about the motion's removal of procedural safeguards, right, of ownership disclosure and during the modification process. You know, competitors and landlords, unhappy investors regularly have attempted to withdraw, cancel, and relocate otherwise change pending records without consent of social equity applicants. We ask that you rescind the motion due to its unintended consequence and instead adopt the DCR's proposed recommendations, alternative language, right, for the ordinance. And we can really prioritize social equity and the tax revenue for the city of Los Angeles as it pertains to the cannabis, as well as recognize, let the record reflect, there are about 250 licenses at stake if we make the wrong decision here. I thank you all for your time. Peace and love.
Thank you. If anyone wishes to provide public comment, please dial *9. Caller with phone number ending in 6760, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Good afternoon. I'd like to speak on all items.
Sure, you have 3 minutes.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Kika Keith. I am the president of the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association. I'm a Phase 3 Round 1 operator, one of a handful that are currently having our doors open, been almost open for 3 months now. And over the past 3 years, I've come before this council, this commission, the neighborhood councils, all over, saying that the most critical part, and not just myself, like community members, and we know that you guys have heard us, we need protection to social equity applicants. There has not been oversight. There's an equity share guidelines without true effectuation to make sure that social equity applicants are actually maintaining their position of ownership. And we've seen it. We know that it's happening. You guys have heard the testimony, meeting after meeting of those of us who are out here struggling. When you ask what's going on with the 120, the majority of them are in standoff with predatory agreements and investors who are threatening lawsuits. And so it's at the point now, you guys, that social equity is prioritized. And we were excited to see that motion come out to push the line to get the process to go faster. But we can't go faster and then lose oversight. And that's what the current motion does. We let folks get through without determining if they are qualified, especially if they're partners with social equity. And so as I hear the council and at these other meetings, they're saying that this is to help social equity. Actually, it will be to the detriment of the social equity program if we do not adopt the DCR's recommendations. They are very detailed. And that's what's lacking in the current motion. We need to make sure that social equity is protected, that the cannabis licensing process is protected, that the public health and safety of our community members is protected, because we know who's owning these shops. And so it's very important, if we're prioritizing equity and diversity, that we put this first. Social justice must happen. And so we're asking you, not just myself as an operator, but as the membership of the Social Equity Owners and Workers in the city of Los Angeles, it is imperative, Commission, that you get City Council to adopt this language, this very specific language that will be to the benefit not only of the current license holders and potential applicants, but in the next rounds in the future and in the future to come with social equity. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller with phone number ending in 9906, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Thank you. This is Cherie Franklin with Ujima Tribe and Think and Grow Lab. I'd like to speak on the same items that Kika Keith spoke on, all of the items.
Sure, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I just want to take you back as to why we're here today. Kika Keith, along with myself and several other leaders, Cheryl Branch, we met with DCR to explain that this would happen prior to us getting into offering licensing, because we understood what was going to happen, that You have social equity, people who, by your own criteria, are people who have lived in communities, have been disadvantaged. You're giving them an opportunity. But what you did was that you said, okay, you have from 45 days or whatever the period was through July 29th or whatever date to get qualified. And then by September 3rd, the day after Labor Day, you have to have everything in place. You have to have your license, your licensing, your site approved to make sure it's right, a site plan, a floor plan, financing, a partnership, a lease agreement in less than 45 days. Nobody could do that for any type of business. And I would challenge you for anything, liquor store, restaurant, bicycle shop, it doesn't matter. You put people in a position of disadvantage. So what happened after that? All of these predators coming down as they descend on every community, trying to take over the little bit that we have in social equity, descended on Los Angeles. It was ridiculous, the number of calls and people. Hey, don't worry, I'll help you. Come over here and work with me. Don't worry, we know that landlord. Just sign here. You don't have any time left because they put this deadline the day after Labor Day. So you better sign if you want to get something. You guys put people in this position when you did that. You didn't give proper time. You didn't give time to vet. We didn't have any criteria in place to help and support people. There was no counseling. There wasn't anything in place. And that's how we got to these horrible agreements. And we knew it would happen. And then you selected a process where people had to have some fast internet. And we know that South LA doesn't have it, for people who did represent them could be outside of the city to go after. So the system was set up was to fail for people who needed it. And now what we're saying to you is what the motion does, a council motion, is doing the same thing, not giving the proper time, not giving time to vet, not giving time for people to get out of these relationships, and making it seem as though people can't do it on their own. Well, they can do it if they have proper time, just like any other business. They can do it if they have a time to vet who they want to be involved with their business. They can do it if they have a little access to training. And that's what we're saying. And I thank Kat Packer for laying this out very succinctly. And we spent a lot of time with the commission and with our council offices and with the community. And we want to know that we have the support of the commission and the city in accepting this and understanding. We're not telling you something because it's just out of the blue. We're telling you because we watched it happen and we knew it would happen. And we've been warning you for 3 years. And we really would like for you to truly give these 120 applicants an opportunity to succeed. And it doesn't take a lot to do that. It takes understanding business and understanding how do you support them. And it's going to take us being true and honest to what we really believe in, and that's social equity. It's not just with emotion. It's understanding the process and the business and what truly will help the businesses be successful. We implore you to take those recommendations from the executive director, Kat Packer, and accept them and let us do this right. Stop mitigating our ability to do this right. And you have an opportunity to do that today. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller with phone number ending in 9705. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Yes, hello. Thank you for taking my call. My name is Lewis Harris, and I am a member of the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association and an advocate. And I just wanted to say that I'm thankful for everybody that's gone in front of me. I hope that they made it clear that it is imperative for social equity right now to be prioritized, that the 120 that are at risk right now should be given an opportunity to succeed. So even though all the confusion and everything was at the beginning, we believe the DCR is finally getting it correct. So we just hope that you see that, work with Kat right now, and let's push this forward to prioritize the social equity right now. It's a value to not only the city, and the communities that they will be serving, but it's a value to really humanity of fixing a problem of the communities that really were affected by the war on drugs. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Caller with phone number ending in 8217, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hello, I would like to address all talking points.
Sure, you have 3 minutes.
Perfect. Greetings and blessings to every caller on the line. My name is Jesse Callier. I'm a social equity advocate and applicant. I'd like to thank CD8 and CD9 for introducing this motion CF 21-1083. However, we strongly request and advise the LA City Council not to amend the LAMC as recommended by the proposed motion because of the unintended consequences, like the lack of oversight for predatory agreements. Again, I strongly request that the City Council amend the LAMC exactly as recommended by the DCR's Executive Director's response to the proposed motion, which was released on October 29th, 2021. And I yield my time.
Thank you. If anyone wishes to provide public comment, please dial *9. Caller with phone number ending in 8876, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, yes, my name is Madison Shockley. I'd like to speak on item number 3.
Sure, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association, and we've been mulling over this motion that was put forward by CD8 and how it might impact us. And initially, it was really important that we get those dates rescinded. December 31st. Nobody would have been able to make a modification to their location, and that was really important. And the DCR went and did that on their own unilaterally. But they were looking at other things that were in the motion as well. And when we look closely, we learned that a lot of these measures took away the ability for the DCR to know who the owners were when ownership modifications come up, and that's not beneficial for social equity. And I'm not sure where those interests are coming from. So that was a big thing. And then the recommendations that DCR has put forward so far in response, I think, have been part of a collaborative effort of them listening to the community of applicants of what we actually need in the process. And many of those recommendations relate to provisions that would help applicants who are in disputes with investors. Many of the 120 that haven't submitted new applications can't move forward because they need to submit a new application. That's why the refiling process is in the recommendations. And so these are things that we want move forward. We want the commission to advocate for these things to be put in the new motion to the city council. That's why we're here advocating to you guys, because we hope that you guys will ask them to put these measures in the motion as CAT has recommended. So we thank you for your time.
Thank you. Caller with phone number ending in 0840, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hello, my name is Luis Rivera. I'm calling from Social Equity LA. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Yes, my name is Luis Rivera, and I'm with Social Equity LA. I'd like
Okay,
to
go ahead.
comment on all items.
Sure, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, first I'd like to thank the City Council for their motion and as well as the DCR for their report on outlining some of the challenges that they felt would arise from those amendments if adopted, and as well as proposing their own amendments, as well as the planning committee for hearing the community and passing forward that motion. I think we all know that all of those that have been through the process, there is changes needed. I think DCR has took a lot of steps forward these last months, and we would encourage the DCR and the City Council to work together to propose maybe a reconciliation or recommendation to move forward, but allowing applicants with temporary approval to have been deemed abandoned to submit a new application within 1 year or more of their activities listed in their initial application, even if it's not currently available. Also, the other recommendation the DCR has set forward to modify LAMC 10.4.03 to establish a concrete processing timeline in which certain licensing processes will take place if the expedited fees are paid, as well as permit applicants or licensees to submit a relocation request within their existing community plan area or for another community plan area. And lastly, authorize DCR to review their equity share documents, well, potentially outside or inside of the temporary approval application. Those things, as we said, may have unintended consequences, but really looking at just merging both of the recommendations a little more so that there is transparency and fairness and equity in both those that have went through this year-long process or 2-3 year-long process, and those that are now going to apply and may not have to go through some of the heartaches that we all had to go through. And we'll have to make sure that that process is implemented fairly moving forward and equitably. Thank you.
Thank you. President On, I do not see any more raised hands.
Okay, let's give it a few more seconds just in case. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. With that, I want to thank everyone for your public comments today. With that, I'm going to close both the general public comment agenda item and also the single or multiple agenda item periods as well. They are both now closed. Let's go ahead and move on to item number 1. Commissioners, you should have received an advanced calendar in front of you with our future meeting dates. Please take a look and advise if there are any planned absences for any of the commissioners. Do I see any?
It's Commissioner Mercado. I won't be around April 7th.
April 7th. Okay, Commissioner Mercado will be absent April 7th. Are there any others? I will likely be unavailable on the 18th of this month.
I'll make a note of both dates. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the approval of the minutes. We were sent the minutes of October 21st, 2021 for review. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
This is Commissioner Villa. I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Villa. We have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
It's Commissioner Mercado. I can second.
Commissioner Mercado with the second. Mr. Vizo, please call the roll.
Commissioner Villa, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Mercado, how do you vote?
Aye.
Vice President Mason, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Naro, how do you vote?
Aye.
President On, how do you vote?
Aye.
The vote is 5-0 and the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to commission announcements and updates. Commissioners, do you have any announcements or updates to share at this time?
This is Vice President Mason, none from me.
None? Okay, I don't think we have any. Let's move on to future agenda requests. Commissioners, are there any future agenda requests you'd like to note at this time? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close out item number 1. We'll move on to item number 2 of the agenda. Finding to continue teleconference meetings pursuant to AB 361. AB 361 requires that all legislative bodies make findings concerning the state of emergency stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic to continue holding virtual meetings. Do I have a motion to approve and continue teleconference meetings pursuant to AB 361?
This is Commissioner Villa. I move that the commission determines in accordance with AB 361, Section 3E3, that this legislative body is considered the circumstances of the state of emergency, and that the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the members to meet safely in person, and/or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion, Commissioner Naro. Second.
Commissioner Naro with the second. Ms. Treviso, please call the roll.
Commissioner Villa, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Commissioner Naro, how do you vote?
Aye.
Vice President Mason, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Mercado, how do you vote?
Aye.
President On, how do you vote?
Aye.
The vote is 5-0 and the motion passes.
Thank you. Now, moving on to item number 3, we have a policy update from the Department of Cannabis Regulation. Is there a presentation from staff?
Yes, President On. I'll be leading that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Packer. Whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you so much, commissioners, for your time today. Part of what I'd like to be able to do is to provide a policy update. During the last commission meeting, we had shared at least preliminary information about a motion that had been introduced and that was moving through the legislative process. At the last commission meeting, we had shared essentially our initial response, but there's been a lot of action since then. And as a body that is jointly responsible for advising the City of Los Angeles on its cannabis policies, we want to present this policy update for your consideration, and I'm hopeful that we can have a discussion about some of the considered proposals to amend our current cannabis policies. We can have a discussion about the motion, our subsequent response, and am hopeful that this body will be willing and interested in taking a position on these particular policy considerations that will be before council. Next slide. As I mentioned at the last meeting, some of these sequences are outside of our control. So the Department of Cannabis Regulation doesn't necessarily know how quickly these items are going to move through the various committees, or how quickly council could formally adopt the motion and instruct the city attorney to amend the ordinances. But we're trying to come back to this body with time for discussion so that these different issues that are raised both in the motion and by stakeholders can have the opportunity for public deliberation, because there are lots of nuances associated with the details, both of the motion and our report. But I think jointly and collectively, the City Council, the Mayor, Department of Cannabis Regulation and Cannabis Regulation Commission should be similarly committed to making sure that the city is able to administer the processes that we've established and that we're able to do so in ways that are responsible, equitable, and expeditious. And I recognize that at its core, that is the intention behind the motion. At the last commission meeting, Vice President Mason, you encouraged the department to lean in to some of the feedback that we have received to date. And that's part of what we've been doing since the last commission meeting, meeting with a number of different stakeholders and organizations and council offices as well, to try and find a balance between what are often competing priorities, but as I think was evidenced by some of the feedback that was shared with this body today, on balance, this city still wants to be in the position of prioritizing social equity and its equity program. And as such, again, this motion and related policy considerations are going to require thoughtful deliberation. And once a policy is decided, or at least simultaneously as these policies are decided, it is going to be similarly important for the city collectively to make sure that the policies and programs that the department is positioned to administer, that we actually have the resources, sufficient resources to do so in ways that meet the expectations of the many stakeholders that we serve. Next slide. So as mentioned, at the last Cannabis Regulation Commission meeting on September 29th, a motion was introduced primarily by Council Districts 8 and 9 that would require various amendments to the Los Angeles Municipal Code. Specifically would make changes to the DCR's application process. And the motion would also instruct DCR to take several actions related to the administration of our cannabis license application process, and also included several instructions to report back on related information. What you're looking at, commissioners and member of the public, is a screenshot illustration of the first page of the motion that was introduced on the 29th of September. Next slide. So the motion itself is really broken up into two different sections. One section is an attached draft proposal proposing specific amendments to the Los Angeles Municipal Code. The other half of the motion contains a series of instructions to the department. And I want to be able to share with this body and stakeholders our opinion on both, because they have differing impacts. The changes to the municipal code will have certain impacts, and the instructions have differing impacts. And so, at least for the purpose of walking through the motion and our position, I do want to make a specific delineation between the instructions that are included in the motion and the motion's attached draft proposal. So we'll be focusing on both. Next slide. First, let's look at the instructions. The instructions themselves are comprised on two different pages. There are 8 instructions in total. We'll walk through each of the instructions and what our response is, but there, as a part of this particular motion, are 8 individual instructions to the department. Now that we've taken a look at the instructions, let's go ahead to the next slide and look at the attached draft proposal. The motion's attached draft proposal essentially can be categorized in two different sections. You'll see right here an illustration of the 3 pages that comprise the attached proposal. What you'll notice, commissioners and members of the public, that there is a section A of the draft proposal that deals specifically with license application procedures. There's section B, which talks specifically about license modification procedures. And on the last page, there's language that relates to equity programming, but you're looking in total at the 3 pages that comprise the attached draft proposal. Next slide. As mentioned, the attached proposal itself has section A, which amends section 104.03 and 104.06, specifically as it relates to license applications. And there are amendments specifically to section 104.03E of our municipal code that would make changes to the license modification process. So A talks about license application processes, B talks about license modification processes. And then just for kind of ease of understanding, we're going to refer to this last section as C, which talks specifically about social equity program annual reporting. But by and large, that is how the motion itself is organized. Making specific amendments to different sections in relation to the application and modification process, and also creating a new requirement for social equity businesses to report on certain related compliance matters on an annual basis. Next slide. So in response to this motion, we first, before we had an opportunity to kind of deep dive on the motion, we again had a Cannabis Regulation Commission meetings. And so you all and stakeholders who joined that meeting got an opportunity to receive some of our initial feedback. But just like many stakeholders, my team spent a lot of time looking at the motion language and going through and reviewing what its impacts would be. And after some intentional collaboration and deliberation, and also after connecting with several different applicants and organizations that represent applicants and licensees and social equity applicants, prepared a formal response to the motion. And our formal response is captured in total in a report that we transmitted to City Council on October 29th of this year. Next slide. On the left, you will see an illustration of the first page of our October 29th report. We did share a pretty detailed report. It's 37 pages. It's divided into several different sections. We'll provide a quick overview. There is an executive summary section, a background section, a section that discusses the City Council's most recent amendments to our cannabis processes, which just happened in July of this year. It discusses our position on the instructions that we just referenced. And there's a section of our report that discusses the specific ordinance amendments that the motion proposes. And then section 6 of our report details the department's recommendations that were made in close collaboration, again, with policymakers, stakeholders, social equity organizations, and really based on a lot of the feedback that we've been receiving jointly with this body through Cannabis Regulation Commission meetings. For the public's benefit and for the commission's benefit, I'm not going to read the 37-page report today, but it is available online. You can look at the specific council file 21-1083 and find a copy of this report, which details everything that I'll provide, just an overview of during today's presentation. But we'll quickly walk through the different elements that are contained in the report. Next slide. So the executive summary itself really seeks to capture our overall position on the motion. And this is one of the particular sections that I will read because we were intentional about trying to capture both the components of the motion, the instructions, and the draft proposal that we feel will increase transparency and allow for a more expeditious review process. And we articulate in our report what those particular provisions and policies are and voice support for those. But our report also details several provisions, specific provisions in the attached draft proposal, which we feel would be detrimental to the licensing and social equity program. And so as we share this executive summary and as we share our opinion generally, I want to remind this body that at the end of the day, the department and the commission are responsible for advising the city of Los Angeles on its cannabis policies and programs, specifically as they relate to commercial cannabis activity. But we're also responsible for administering those policies. And while we will use strong language today to voice concerns and support for specific provisions, the reality is that this department, despite its advisory capacity, is responsible for administering whatever policy is ultimately adopted by City Council. And that's part of the reason why we want to make sure that we're having some intentional and public deliberation about what some of these impacts will be if this particular motion is adopted. That being said, we are hopeful and actively working with City Council, hopeful that we can continue to work with City Council and stakeholders and this body to again find policy that balances all of the different considerations, but prioritizes social equity. So in general, the department remains committed to ensuring that cannabis business licensing in the city of Los Angeles is as fast, efficient, and equitable as possible. We recognize the many hardships facing cannabis social equity applicants and the industry at large. And we are taking action to continue to provide support and prompt service in the face of extreme challenges in the city due to COVID-19 and related fiscal crisis. Again, we look forward to continuing to work with city leadership and stakeholders as we continue to build upon the nation's largest local cannabis market and social equity program. As we've already shared, the motion itself contains several instructions and changes to the LAMC. And again, although we agree that certain instructions and proposals within the motion would increase transparency and the effectiveness of the application process, we still have concerns about several alarming provisions in the motion that would negatively impact the city's licensing program, social equity program, both of which are critical to the city's efforts to ensure equity, public health, public safety, and economic output regarding commercial cannabis activity. It's our position that collectively certain provisions will cause more harm than good, specifically to social equity applicants, and certain provisions, if adopted, would thwart our existing efforts to responsibly and equitably license and regulate commercial cannabis activity. Now, because of the nature of some of these provisions, there are fiscal and legal impacts, which we won't detail today, but we're hopeful that we'll have an opportunity to detail the fiscal impacts and resources needed at a future meeting before the Budget and Finance Committee. But our report and its executive summary details some of the actions that we've taken to date and actions that we'd like the city to take collectively so that we can move our program and its applicants forward. I'd like to first articulate that DCR has already completed several of the instructions that are in the motion. For example, there's an instruction that has already been completed, essentially allowing applicants to continue to operate while one owner remains the same, kind of consistent with state law. Similarly, there was an instruction for us to begin accepting applications for delivery, manufacturing, distribution, new licenses on October 1st. We have already met obligations that would be created with that instruction. Similarly, instructions number 2, 4, and 8 have been addressed. We have already completed the review of the applications that were instructed to complete in instruction number 2. We are continuing to update our licensing map consistent with instruction number 4, and we have already rescinded the December 31st, 2021 deadline for Phase 3 Retail Round 1 applicants to submit relocation and entity substitution requests. So again, several of the instructions themselves have been addressed. But our main concern, to be completely frank, aren't these instructions. They are the changes that would be made to the Los Angeles Municipal Code. And it's not even the changes that create deadlines that we have most concern about. I'd like to say specifically to state on the record our position about these deadlines, that we're fully supportive of establishing deadlines and processing timelines in relation to the license application process and to the license modification process. However, it's going to be important that the department be appropriately resourced to meet the deadlines, because putting a deadline in an ordinance alone without equipping the department with the resources necessary to meet the obligations that it will be held accountable for is not going to result in what's promised in this motion. Again, our primary concern are the proposed ordinance amendments, which collectively would eliminate our ability to collect and review information related to business applications and license modifications. And it's a deletion of our ability to collect lots of information, not just ownership information, but I think as raised by certain stakeholders and based on our conversations with other elected offices, this is one of those things that's critically important to us. Does the city have an interest in knowing who owns these businesses? Absolutely. It would be irresponsible for us to remove infrastructure that allows us to determine who these owners are. That's part of the logic behind why we created a licensing and regulatory program, so that we could make a distinction between who was licensed, what business entities were licensed, who those owners were, and our entire social equity program, the crux of the social equity program, rests on infrastructure that exists today that allows the department to review and know who owns the business. This is the type of infrastructure that, in the interest of moving things along more quickly, would be eliminated. And so again, we're going to be very just direct in articulating what our concerns are. They're again detailed in the executive summary and our 37-page report. But because of our concerns, our ask is twofold to City Council. We are asking City Council, one, not to amend the municipal code as requested or instructed in the motion, but instead to amend the municipal code consistent with our recommendations. And a stakeholder had made a comment essentially asking, hoping that the city council and the department work together and collaborate and compromise. And I want to share with this body and stakeholders that that's what we're in the business of doing. We're advisors to the city in this capacity. I want the city to be able to move forward with policies and programs that are going to be beneficial to the city collectively. That means balancing business interests with non-business interests, health and public safety with economic interests and interests of efficiency. But what I don't want to see the city put itself in a position to do is to compromise on the very principles that we have been working diligently over the course of the last several months, or I'm sorry, the last several years to create oversight, particularly as it relates to owners. Now, I think one stakeholder earlier said that we haven't had this oversight, this oversight has never existed, but that's not true. That's not necessarily true. There is infrastructure and oversight that exists today. The Department of Cannabis Regulation is actively looking at, in particular, social equity program participants' operating agreements to determine if there are violations with the city's equity share requirements. And there have been a number of applicants who have had to make changes to those documents, to those agreements, because there were violations that were identified. Now, I'll acknowledge that we want to be able to continue to increase oversight and strengthen that oversight. But I think it does a disservice, at least in the short term, to say that the oversight isn't there, because oversight is there. And this is the exact type of oversight that would be removed if this particular motion moves forward. But lots of things to consider and unpack. Again, all of these details are shared in our report. We're just going to walk through a high-level summary of these details. And again, this particular presentation and the slide will be available both for commissioners and the public to consider after this particular presentation. Next slide. So by way of background, again, I recognize that the intention of the motion, or at least part of the intention around the motion, is to create a process where applicants can move through our license application process in a way that is transparent, in a way that is predictable, in a way that is expeditious. And we are committed as a department, as a city, to moving that particular and those particular goals forward. And we've taken action and steps to date to improve those processes. Part of the, I think, frustration that's voiced in some of the issues that the motion is seeking to address are delays that have been associated with the process. And as our report points out, delays are often the result of several contributing factors, some of which are within the department's control and some of which are not in the department's control. One of those things that is in the city's control collectively, however, that has impacted our ability to move forward more expeditiously are the resources that the department has been granted to date. Now, I know that this will not come as any surprise to this body or stakeholders who continue to join this body, but the Department of Cannabis Regulation has, since establishment, been in a position where we haven't quite had the resources to match what our mandated obligations are. This is evident by the reality that we started accepting applications for phase 1 applicants when we had about 3 staff, that we were instructed to begin phase 3 retail round 1 processing before we had infrastructure in place to make sure that folks had the type of technical assistance that they were seeking. And so this should come as no surprise to this body, but nonetheless, it's important as the city is considering new obligations and additional obligations to consider that some of the delays that we've experienced thus far have been a direct result of a lack of resources. And part of what we are in the process of doing right now, and this happens every single year, but what we're in the process of doing right now is assessing the type of fiscal resources that we would need to continue to administer existing processes, resources that we will need to administer new processes, and there are going to be several new processes that we are going to be mandated to implement next year, even outside of consideration of this motion, namely the state CEQA requirements and moving folks through our local annual licensing process. But it's pertinent from a public policy management standpoint that as the city continues to explore the expansion of responsibilities for the Department of Cannabis Regulation, that there be a corresponding expansion of resources. And I'm hopeful, in part because resources made available that will be made available through the state of California and through resources that we will request in this year's budget cycle and work with council to secure and the mayor to secure in this year's budget cycle, that we would be in a much better position to meet the obligations that are considered not only in this motion, but considered in other processes that we'll be responsible for administering in the short term. Next slide. Again, part of what the motion seeks to do, again, is to provide this process that allows for transparency, predictability, and speed in going through the process. And part of what we do in our report, specifically in section 3, is detail how the city of Los Angeles just recently, this summer, amended its entire application process. The pre-application process was amended. The temporary approval process was amended. The modification process was amended. The public convenience or necessity process were amended, all to accomplish the same goal that this motion purports to accomplish. And we detail how changes to the pre-application review process and changes to the temporary approval process are now going to give the city, the department, and applicants the transparency of process that folks need to move forward. Next slide. So again, these amendments that were made, recommended by the department, largely in consultation with feedback from this body and other stakeholders, to expedite the process, all of these changes became effective on July 1st. This is part of the reason why we have been reporting at past commission meetings that we took parts of our online system offline over the summer so that we could update everything to be consistent with these changes. But I want to remind this body, like I have been sharing similarly with council offices, that the City Council just did a comprehensive overhaul this summer to try and address issues related to transparency, predictability, and speed. And we appreciate City Council for adopting the department's recommendations that are going to allow us to do this in a more expeditious way and allow us to do this in a way that is less burdensome than it has been historically. Specifically, some of these kind of major changes our pre-application review process so that at the pre-application review stage, all we're looking at is location compliance. We've also made fundamental changes to the temporary approval process, namely that the temporary approval process is now a standalone DCR application, and folks no longer need to get a state license before they are able to be issued a DCR temporary approval, nor are applicants required to get a fire permit or receive other permits before we issue a temporary approval. These are fundamental and foundational changes put in place not only to reduce requirements associated with the pre-application review process, but to streamline the administration of those requirements. Next slide. And you all have seen this. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We've been at the commission meetings for the last 5 months, sharing updates about these pre-application review workflows and the temporary approval workflow. But as a reminder, all of these things just recently changed. We now have updated workflows that walk folks step by step through each of the application processes. So you're looking now at the pre-application review workflow. We'll now transition to the next slide and look at the temporary approval workflow. With these updated workflows and procedures, requirements have been made less burdensome. The administration of these requirements has been streamlined. We have updated our resources to try and make these processes more transparent. We'll share a little bit more about some of those resources later. Next slide. The Department of Cannabis Regulation and the amendments themselves also made modifications to the way that we process license modifications. Again, we've detailed this at past commission meetings. So we will go ahead and advance to the next slide. As just recently mentioned, not only have we updated all of these processes and workflows and resources for the public, but primarily led by our social equity program director, Dr. Monty Brown, we have been making a series of resources available to the public to try and help them navigate through the process, namely on the 12th of October and on the 26th of October, myself and Jason Colleen, my assistant executive director who leads our licensing section, led workshops and webinars for the public, walking them through these updated processes. Next slide. So these are all things that were happening before the motion was introduced. I'd like to now pivot, and this presentation is largely following the sequence and organization of the report that we transmitted. But what I'd like to be able to do quickly, now that we've covered our executive summary and our background on the motion itself, quickly walk through a discussion of the instructions in the motion. There's a whole section in our report that details our position on the instructions. I won't spend a lot of time on it today, in part just because, again, the instructions aren't our primary concern. One, because we've done most of them. Our primary concern is what's contained in the attached draft proposal. But we will quickly go through these. Again, this entire presentation will be made available to the public. So if we can quickly advance through these, know that as commissioners, members of the public will be able to view this afterwards. Next slide. So one of the instructions essentially restricts our ability to take our licensing software offline, even if it's to make necessary technical changes. Next slide. We have concerns about this particular instruction. We're opposed to this particular instruction just because it eliminates our ability to conduct routine maintenance. Most of the time we can conduct routine maintenance overnight or in a shorter period of time, but because the recent municipal code updates, particularly the July 21 amendments, because they were so comprehensive, there were certain elements of the licensing portal that needed to be taken offline so that we could update and build these new workflows. That type of comprehensive overhaul and the timeline associated with that overhaul isn't always required. Again, it's only required because it was such a comprehensive change to the process. But all city agencies, all systems in reality may need to be taken offline for one reason or another. And the department itself does not maintain or host our own information. And so there may be some of these things that are just outside of our control. But we've detailed our response to that particular instruction. It's more so about technical feasibility. We don't feel as though this particular instruction is technologically feasible. Next slide. This next instruction essentially is instructing the department within 15 days of the adoption of this instruction to complete a review of 3 different categories of applicants. Phase 3 applicants whose premises comply would essentially require us to complete a review of all of the pending relocation requests, and would also require a completion of a review of all modification requests. All of these particular categories of application processes have already been complete. And so we have already completed a review of all of the phase 3 pending phase 3 applications whose premises comply, all of the pending relocation requests, and the pending modification requests. As of the date that this particular motion was introduced, at least for folks who had applications pending by July 1st, all of those particular applications had been processed, reviewed for completeness. The motion also would instruct us to provide applicants with a status of local compliance underway after an applicant completed land use review. And we've detailed this in our report, and we actually talk about it a little bit later in the presentation, but we have concern about any instruction, any type of change to the municipal code that would require us to provide this status, because we feel as though providing a status immediately of local compliance underway immediately after location review is going to result in 2 things. One, this particular status at this point in time would be inconsistent with state requirements because the state is asking us to identify the business entity who's applying for the license, the location, and the activity. When we're talking about pre-location review, when we're talking about the location compliance, all we've done at that point is determine the location. We don't know who the business entity is yet. We don't know who or what activities they're applying for. The other just practical result of this type of instruction and this particular type of amendment to the code is that it would allow applicants to complete the state licensing process, because that's what essentially folks need to complete the state licensing process, the status of local compliance underway. You don't need the status to start the state application process, but you do need the status to complete the process. And this would essentially afford applicants the ability to complete the state's licensing process without ever having to share with the department who the applicant is, what activities they're applying for, and all of that critically important application information related to ownership and commercial cannabis activity that we currently collect. So we are opposed to any type of instruction or ordinance change that would allow for applicants to get this status of local compliance underway simply by having a location that is compliant. The way that it's currently inserted into our workflow is that folks get this status of local compliance underway once we determine that the applicant has provided us a complete temporary approval application. And it's important for us to have a complete temporary approval application before we provide this status to the state. One, because we need to know who the entity is that's applying for a license. Two, we need to know what commercial cannabis activities they're applying for. And three, as it relates to the social equity program, we do not feel as though it is in the best interest of the social equity applicants to allow applicants to get this status and complete the state's licensing process before ever evidencing to the department that they even intend to comply with the city's social equity program. We've already had real life and lived experience to date, and experiences shared with us by applicants who have let us know that there are non-equity owners, investors, and management companies who are applying for these licenses with no intention of meeting the requirements, but are hoping to be able to secure state licensing or other types of benefits and then essentially flip them before actually making good on the tenets of the social equity program. So again, even this instruction, there's also corresponding code amendments that would seek to do the same thing, but these are the types of impacts that will result if this particular motion is adopted as written. Next slide. Again, just in general, in relation to this particular instruction, we are opposed to the instruction for two reasons. Again, we've already completed the review. It's not the review that we have an issue with. It's the second part of the instruction, which, because applicants have simply completed this review, would require us to give them the status of local compliance underway. Next slide. So there's another instruction that essentially would require the department to allow an applicant to continue to operate if at least one owner remains an owner in any capacity under state law. This essentially would allow someone to continue to operate so long as there was an officer, director, or someone who's participating in the management direction or control of the licensee. I'll share that there is corresponding language in the draft proposal that seeks to do the same thing. Some of these things are both, some of these issues that we're going to raise are not only contained in the draft proposal, but are similarly contained in these instructions. But we have a concern with this instruction for several reasons. One, the municipal code currently refers to the state's definition of owner. And the municipal code itself already states that if at least one owner is not transferring his or her ownership interest and will remain an owner, that the business may continue to operate. So there's no change there. The ordinance already allows for that. But the department has consistently interpreted the language, quote unquote, his or her ownership interest to require at least one bona fide owner with an ownership interest to remain on the application. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. We seek to address this issue in our recommendations. Essentially, what the Department of Cannabis Regulation is recommending is that the City of Los Angeles create its own definition of owner that is not dependent on the state's definition of owner. The state of California just recently expanded its definition of owner to include essentially folks who we at the local level would consider to be management companies. And we want to make sure that we have someone that's associated with this business that has an ownership interest in the business. We don't want to see a situation in which folks are able to completely swap out the ownership interest. Think about how this would impact our social equity applicants. We don't want to be in a situation where we'd create a process where people can completely swap out their ownership interest so long as a management company or a manager stayed the same. That is in direct conflict with what social equity applicants have raised as being a priority to them and some of the concerns that they have. Next slide. The next instruction is in relation to updating our licensing map. I'll just quickly go through this to say the department itself does not maintain or host our map. We work in partnership with the Department of City Planning to maintain the map and actually work with several different agencies to pull data that's been reflected on that map, but we are committed to continuing to update that map regularly. We'll move to the next slide. So again, we will continue to work with our city partners to make sure that the map is updated as frequently as possible. We are in the process of adding some new layers to the map so that people can not only see what the existing licenses are that have been issued, but particularly in the case of relocations and relocations associated with retail businesses, we also are going to be creating a layer so that folks can see where pending relocation requests exist. But again, this map in this process is not managed entirely by the department. And so our ability to meet these instructions is going to be dependent on, in part, other agencies. Next slide. Instruction number 5 essentially instructs the department to report back to the Plum Committee with data in relation to our obligations with CEQA. Go to the next slide, please. In general, our response is that we welcome the opportunity to share information with the City Council about the licensing program, and we are prepared to regularly report the information that is requested in the motion. Next slide. Again, motion instruction number 6 essentially instructs the department to begin to accept applications for testing, distribution, manufacturing, and delivery no later than October 1st, 2021. Next slide. As mentioned at the top of this presentation, that is an instruction that we have already executed. We, in fact, began accepting applications for those new activities on October 1st. Next slide. Similar to instruction number 5, this is an instruction requesting, instructing a report back from the department to Plum Committee with instructions to share specific categories of information. Next slide. Similarly, we welcome the opportunity to share this information with the council. We're prepared to regularly report this information. And we can make sure that the same information that we would be sharing with the Plum Committee as a part of these instructions for report back, that we bring back to this body for consideration as well. But we are prepared to regularly report the information requested in this instruction. Next slide. The last instruction essentially instructs us to rescind deadlines and would instruct us to rescind an August 31st deadline and a December 31st deadline. It also would eliminate our ability to impose any deadlines. Next slide. Want to note for the record, again, that DCR has already rescinded the December 31st deadline. We spent a lot of time talking to stakeholders and applicants and trying to understand exactly the types of changes that they need to make and how long they'd need to make those changes. And again, this particular deadline has already been rescinded. However, we do currently oppose the rescission of the August 31st deadline for applicants without temporary approval to make relocation requests, ownership modifications, and entity substitutions. A couple things about this deadline. One, it passed almost 3 months ago. Two, this deadline was implemented specifically to allow us to effectuate responsible data management protocols as they relate to our licensing and social equity program. And without allowing that to continue to sound as vague as it does, the reality is that the Department of Cannabis Regulation needs to be able to, when there are certain modification requests that are made, not all modification requests, but when certain modification requests are made, it necessitates the creation of a new application record. I'll say it again. Not all modifications require the establishment of a new modification record, but certain modifications require that an applicant create an entire new application record. And this is in part for kind of legal and administrative purposes for the department, but it also seeks to protect the applicant to make sure that if you, an applicant, are moving your location, or if you're going through an entity substitution, if you're changing your ownership, that you have a record associated with that particular change. Because as we mentioned and detailed in our report, what often happens is that, particularly in the case of social equity applicants and non-equity applicants, there may be disagreements between owners about what particular changes should be made. And we've seen folks who maybe shouldn't have had the authority to make particular changes try and relocate a location, or try and make ownership changes to a business, or to try to go through an entity substitution. And so this deadline was effectuated in part to make sure that for folks who need to go through these types of changes, it's not denying a path forward for these particular changes, but essentially saying, if these are the types of changes that you want to make, and there are a total of 8 different modifications, license modifications that folks could make. We didn't prevent folks from making those types of modifications, all types of modifications, just 3 out of 8. And the logic behind that, again, is that these particular 3 types of modifications require the new application record. And part of what we want to be able to do, part of what's important for us to be able to do so that we can administer these processes efficiently, is to make sure that regardless of whether or not you applied as a phase 1 applicant, a phase 2 applicant, or a phase 3 applicant, that the department has a clean record of your application information. And there were a bunch of existing applicants who did not have that new record. So the purpose of this particular deadline was to kind of draw a cliff to say, if you want to make these changes after the date, you're still able to make them. But the process that you're going to make these changes is by creating a new application record. And the actual creation of that new application record requires a few steps. And I recognize that applicants, when they heard what we were calling the step, AKA submit a new application, that sounded like it was going to be overly burdensome. But regardless of what it's called, whether or not it's called modification request or submit a new application, the documents that we need are the exact same. And so I want to, particularly for folks who had concern about this particular deadline, the August 31st deadline, because remember, we've already rescinded the December 31st deadline. What I'd like to be able to offer to you is that the Department of Cannabis, and this is detailed in our report in the recommendation section, but the Department of Cannabis Regulation, based on our feedback from stakeholders, have come up with this concept called refiling, which essentially would allow applicants who had their applications abandoned for one reason or another, and maybe your application was abandoned because you didn't meet this deadline that has already passed. But if the City Council were to adopt our refiling policy recommendation, it would essentially negate the impact of this particular deadline, because it would allow us to keep our line in the sand so that people who needed to make these changes could get the department the updated records that we need, while also providing a clear path forward for folks to continue to make the changes that they need to make, specifically related to relocation, entity substitution, and ownership changes. This is one of those things where there's a little bit of nuance associated with why this particular decision and deadline was made. And I recognize that these deadlines do have impacts to applicants. But my advice to the city is that the strategy that's needed to actually solve this issue is being offered in the form of the refiling process. And so ultimately what we'd like to be able to do is to have City Council create a process where we can keep this deadline in place because it serves other function, particularly as it relates to kind of record keeping and legal and administrative record keeping, but also provides a path forward for applicants to move forward in getting us the updated record. Next slide. So we've gone through the instructions, and I'd now like to pivot to a discussion of the motion's proposed ordinance amendments. And as I mentioned at the top of this agenda item, it's the motions attached draft proposal that are of primary concern to the Department of Cannabis Regulation, primarily because of the impact that they would have on our current licensing and social equity program. We'll detail those now. Next slide. So again, you're looking at the 3 pages that comprise the attached draft proposal. We'll go through these pages kind of one by one, kind of tackling what the language in the motion, the impact of the language in the motion. But again, remember that it's just these 3 pages and that these pages themselves are kind of broken up into, we'll call it A, B, and C. A talks about processes related to license applications, the license application process. B discusses the license modification process, and we'll call it C, the particular amendment that would establish a reporting requirement for social equity applicants. A, B, and C. Next slide. So these 3 pages of the attached draft proposal, in summary, make what I've categorized this far as 4 significant changes to our municipal code. 1, it would establish application processing timelines. The motion itself would mandate 11 separate timelines related to the license application and modification process. In addition to establishing application processing timelines, it would eliminate certain departmental oversight. Namely, the motion would remove DCR's authority to collect and review important temporary approval application information and information related to modification requests. It would also essentially undermine our ownership requirements because it would establish a loophole that would allow businesses to violate the city's ownership and social equity program requirements. And it would also compromise our licensing and social equity program in that it would require DCR to provide applicants the status of local compliance underway, and we mentioned this earlier, before any state or local requirements are met. In summary, that is our position on what the attached proposal as a whole does. And I guess to be fair, there is one summary that's missing here. The motion would also create a new requirement for social equity businesses to report on an annual basis their compliance with certain social equity program requirements. But in summary, those are the 5 things, again, one's not listed here, that this particular draft proposal would do based on our assessment of the language. Next slide. We're going to walk through how the ordinance does these things, because I know that this has been a missed point. And I've had different stakeholders reach out, particularly social equity applicant stakeholders reach out in response to our report and ask, you know, where in the attached draft proposal does it do this? I don't exactly see the language that creates this particular impact. And so that's part of what I want to be able to quickly walk folks through this afternoon. So as I mentioned, one of the first things that the motion would do is establish application processing timelines. What you can see on your screen on the right are the 2 pages of the attached proposal. And what I've done is I've highlighted in yellow every place where it articulates a application processing timeline that would be established. And you'll see that there's some stuff in section A. Remember that section A talks about license applications. And there's some stuff in section B. Remember that section B talks about license modifications. But essentially would set up timelines, establish timelines, both for the license application process and the license modification process. There will be deadlines for invoicing, for the department to verify location compliance, for the department to determine that a temporary approval application is complete, for the department to conduct its inspections, and deadlines for the department to issue temporary approval once application requirements are met. Similarly, for license modifications, it would create an established process, mandated processing timelines for invoicing, reviewing information related to ownership modifications, reviewing information related to change of business entity and modification requests. All in all, 11 new mandated timelines for the department to meet. Next slide. think that there's, I've heard different folks relay what our opinion is on these different timelines, but I want to say for this body and for stakeholders, we are in full support of being held accountable to these processing timelines. The motion again in total adds 11. But in order to do this effectively, the city has to ensure that the department is adequately resourced to administer the timelines that it will be held accountable for. The motion itself originally incorrectly stated that the department had received $22 million from the state of California to expedite licensing. And the original motion claimed that these resources were the reason that changes to the process were necessary, urgent, and possible. I do want to note that at the most recent Plum Committee meeting, there was an acknowledgement and amendment by the chair to correct that particular inaccuracy, essentially to reflect that we haven't yet received the funds, but that there may be a total of $22 million available. The department, of course, because these resources haven't been granted yet, it's important to note that this particular this motion does not necessarily consider the resources that the department would need. There has been a subsequent amendment for the department to report back on those needs, and we're working on that actively. But it's important to acknowledge that at this point in time, the department does not currently have the resources to administer the application processing timelines as envisioned in this motion. But we are fully supportive of being held accountable to these timelines. We hope that through the city's budget process, we can work with the city council and mayor to ensure that we have the resources, sufficient resources necessary to meet these timelines. Next slide. So another thing that we frame in our report, and it remains our position today, is that the motion itself would eliminate important oversight that the city currently has and has intentionally built into its licensing and regulatory program. And again, looking at the attached proposal, it does this both in section A and B. In section A that talks about license applications, it essentially would eliminate our ability to collect information associated with the temporary approval process. And in section B, it essentially eliminates our authority to collect and review information as a part of the application modification process. Now, the way it does this is it essentially says DCR shall not impose any requirements for temporary approval that are not specifically listed in Municipal Code section 104.06. But what the motion doesn't tell you is that section 104.06 doesn't expressly articulate any temporary approval application requirements. It simply says applicants shall provide information, forms, and documents as required by the department. So by eliminating, essentially by saying DCR shall not impose any requirements not in the code, and then knowing that there aren't any explicit requirements in the code, it eliminates our ability to collect all of the information that we collect today as it relates to the temporary approval application process. And it essentially does the same thing in section B, saying that, listing 3 different types of documents only that we're able to require for a change of business entity. And then in section 5 of essentially B5, it essentially says DCR shall not require any information or documents not specifically referenced in this motion. And in section 104.03E, again, section 104.03E does not specify the specific types of documents. And so by eliminating our ability to collect any requirements that aren't in the code, it eliminates our ability to collect information altogether. This is the elimination of oversight that we have concern about. Now, what the city council could do is choose to incorporate into the municipal code the specific forms, documents, and information that it would like to require as a part of the temporary approval process or license modification process. But by doing nothing and adopting the language as is, it would eliminate our ability to collect this information altogether. And so I wouldn't be able to, this department wouldn't be able to, the city wouldn't be able to have information related to who owns the business or what types of changes are happening to the business, or even things as simple as indemnification agreements and attestations in business premises diagrams, because these things, again, are not listed in the code. Now, to relay to this body that the city council just in July amended the municipal code to say applicants shall provide forms, documents, and information as required by the department. And I think the intention by allowing the department to articulate what these requirements are, as opposed to them being in the code, is that the department has the ability to amend them. And that's part of the reason why we've been able to make the application process less burdensome, because we've actually had the authority and continue to have the authority today to say, you know what, we actually don't need a radius map or we actually don't need this particular requirement. But again, by making these particular changes, it simply removes our ability to collect and review this information altogether. Next slide. And just in summary, again, this is the information that we require as a part of our pre-application review process, our temporary approval process, our application modification process. You can go on the department's website right now, see a list of those documents. My recommendation to the city is that rather than eliminate these things entirely, if you're going to do anything at all, we do need to insert these requirements back into the code. Otherwise, it's going to make the department's life a lot easier. I will acknowledge that, because we won't have applications to review. There won't be any information for us to review as a part of the application. There won't be any information for us to review as a part of the modification process. It would negate our need for some of the additional staff, but I don't think that that's the type a framework that the city of Los Angeles wants to have in relation to a licensing and regulatory program that is responsible and equitable. So we need to have some information. The more responsible decision would be for council to decide what information it wants, if any. Otherwise, we won't have much to look at over here in the Department of Cannabis Regulation. Next slide. On this slide, I want to talk to you about how the motions attached proposal collectively would undermine the city's ownership requirements. What you're looking at on your screen to the left is section B, I think 1A through D. These particular the collection of these particular provisions, A, B, C, and D, essentially would allow folks to make changes before getting those particular changes, ownership changes, They would essentially allow folks to make ownership changes without first getting those ownership changes approved by the department. And it would, at minimum, create a 14-day gap in which the city would know who is the owner of the business, because it essentially says, businesses, you go ahead and make your changes to your organization. All you have to do is tell us 14 days after the fact, meaning that there will be this 14-day period where we don't have any information about who owns the business. From a public health and safety perspective, our concern is what happens when there is a violation or incident, public health or safety incident that occurs at one of these locations during that 14-day gap. But even in consideration of social equity interests, it essentially would allow businesses to make changes to their organizational structure in violation of the city's social equity program requirements. Additional language in this particular section, A through D, essentially would allow folks to continue to operate in violation of the city's ownership requirements and social equity requirements, so long as, and this is the loophole that gets created, so long as there is a pending modification request and a management company, and I'm using the example of a management company because based on the state's recent changes, management companies are considered owners under state law. So long as there's a pending modification request and a manager stays the same, the entire equity interest of that business could change. The department, the city as a whole would not know that information. And again, it creates this loophole where there can be a continuous violation of the city's requirements, so long as those two conditions are met. Next slide. Again, we lay these things out plainly because I'd like council to be able to consider them as they make their policies. If they want to establish a loophole, I just want to make sure that they know that that's what they would be doing. There may be a different intent, but then we would need to try and work together to identify how we could amend the language to effectuate that intent without having some of these unintended consequences. But as written, this particular amendment would establish a loophole that would allow for continuous violation of ownership requirements and ownership requirements as it relates to the social equity program. It eliminates this carefully designed process that we've been working on over the course of the last several years in exchange for expediency, and essentially says the process has taken too long thus far. Instead of having the department have oversight and providing due diligence that's necessary to protect social equity applicants from predatory practices, to ensure that folks aren't being taken advantage of, we're going to let businesses do what they want and tell the department about it and the city about it 14 days later. And even if they're in violation, we'll continue to allow them to operate with this loophole. Can't imagine that that's the intent. Hope that this gets addressed. Next slide. This is the fourth thing, not the last, but the summary. One of the other changes, the impact of these particular proposals is that it would collectively compromise our licensing and social equity program. And I say that, I want to specify how and why. And it has to do specifically with this concept of local compliance underway that we talked about previously. To reiterate, when the state is asking for a local jurisdiction or the city, the Department of Cannabis Regulation, to confirm that a particular applicant has met this status of local compliance underway, they're asking for us to specifically confirm three things. who the entity is, the location where the activity will take place, the commercial cannabis activity will take place, and third, the commercial cannabis activities. What this particular amendment would do, both in Section A and Section B, is essentially say that once an applicant completed location verification, they should be eligible for this status. But remember, commissioners and stakeholders, that when we're doing location compliance, we don't know who the entity is, and we don't specifically know what activities the individual is going to be applying for. All we have at the time of completion of the pre-application review process is a determination of whether or not the location is compliant. So it would be inconsistent with state law for us to simply, after an applicant had gone through location compliance, reply to the state and say, we have all three categories of information that you're asking for. The reality is that at that stage, we wouldn't have all three categories of information that the state is asking for. At the completion of pre-application review, we would only have one of those things, the location. We would not have information about the entity that was applying for a license, nor would we have information about the activities that that particular business was applying for. So our primary concern is that it puts the city in a situation where it would create a requirement that is inconsistent with the state. We wouldn't even be able to appropriately respond to the state and provide them that status, because the state is going to say, confirm A, B, and C. And all we're going to be able to confirm is A. But from a social equity, from a standpoint of considering what the impact of social equity applicants is that it would allow non-equity investors, non-equity owners, and management companies to essentially skip the social equity program's requirements, get through the entire state licensing process without ever having to evidence to the city, the Department of Cannabis Regulation, who the applicant is, who owns this business, and even in the case of social equity applicants, whether or not the entity is compliant with the city's requirements. And so for those reasons, we have specific concerns about the language that's highlighted on the screen. Next slide. Again, our response to this in summary is that, and I recognize it's the balancing of consideration. In the name of expediency, it would advance the interests of non-equity owners, investors, and management companies, essentially allowing them to skip over the social equity program's requirements. You'd be able to get a state license without ever having to evidence compliance with the social equity program, but even again, beyond the social equity program, you'd be able to get that status without even applying for a license at the local level or identifying to the city who you are as a business entity. Next slide. Now, the discussion of the motions, proposals that we've covered thus far were those that were namely in sections A and B. What you're looking on the screen now is what we refer to in our report as C, but the motion itself kind of looked like it was kind of cut and pasted together, so the numbering is a little bit off. So we call it C. The motion, I think, calls it some other number. We'll call it C for the purposes of this conversation. But the motion proposes that on an annual basis, non-equity owners would submit to the department an annual report that would essentially cover the prior year, articulating that they were compliant with the ownership interest requirements. The motion's proposal would require that this particular report and a related attestation or affidavit be signed both by the equity owners and non-equity owners. Next slide. And I want to say that this is the one particular recommendation that we were pleased to see from this particular motion. We are in full support of expanding social equity program reporting requirements, but actually want to see the motion in this language go further, because the motion's language would just have equity owners and non-owners attest to compliance. But there are investors and management companies that are subject to these requirements as well. And we'd want to see all parties who are subject to the requirements of the social equity program participate in this report and related affidavit. And we also want the attestation for compliance not to just be limited to ownership interests, but all requirements within the social equity program. And so while our report and our position today is that we support this particular proposal, we think it can be strengthened and expanded so that it is not narrowly focused on ownership compliance, but includes the necessary characters and folks should be included, including non-equity investors and management companies. Next slide. So thus far, we've really spent our time walking through an outline of the report. We discussed the executive summary. We discussed a little bit of background on the motion. We talked about how the July 2021 amendments have changed the DCR's current process to allow us to effectuate some of these more expedited review processes. We talked about our response to the instructions that are in the motion. We talked about our response to the actual proposed ordinance changes. But part of our consideration of the motion and the feedback that we had been and have continued to receive from stakeholders was that the motion itself didn't do enough to address the impediments that social equity applicants are currently experiencing. And so based on feedback that we've continued to receive from stakeholders, some through the SPARK program, some through these commission meetings, some through one-on-one or small group meetings with individuals and organizations, the department put together a total of 9 proposals, 9 recommendations that we feel each are necessary and important, both for our licensing and social equity program. We'll go to the next slide and quickly summarize them. This particular section of our report, it's section 6 of the report, and part of what we acknowledge is that there is work that still, of course, needs to be done to strengthen oversight and to provide applicants and the department with additional tools to make sure that we're administering and participating in a responsible and equitable market. But I'll just quickly list what these proposals are in title. For more detail about these proposed amendments, I would encourage folks to read our report, section 6, where our proposed amendments are contained. That starts on page 20 of our report. but the Department of Cannabis Regulation proposes amendments that would allow the Department of Cannabis Regulation to provide expedited services to social equity applicants and general applicants. Essentially, it would create a process that would provide applicants who are seeking to go through the process in a more expedited process, peace of mind, knowing that when services, the cost of services are covered to allow us to process the application at an expedited rate, that we are able to do so. We are also recommending amendments to the definition of owner and primary personnel for reasons detailed earlier in the presentation. It's important now that the city have its own definition of ownership. The last several years, our definition of ownership has pointed to the state's definition of ownership. As I mentioned, the state's definition of ownership has now expanded to include things that, to be honest, just aren't owners. And the city has its own interest, separate from the state. The city has its own interest in being able to define who an owner is, specifically as it relates to trying to identify who we're holding accountable for the operations of these businesses, and who gets to receive tangible benefits of ownership, particularly in relation to our social equity program. We are also recommending that the City Council adopt department's recommendation to create a process that we're calling refiling. We recognize that for several different reasons, applicants have not been able to move forward with their existing application. Many applicants have had applications abandoned, either because they have not provided us sufficient information or because they have failed to meet a past deadline, for example, to make good on a payment of an invoice. Nonetheless, considering all of those different circumstances, the Department of Cannabis Regulation is recommending that the city create a refiling process that would essentially allow applicants whose initial applications were deemed abandoned to, within 1 year of the date that they're notified that their application is abandoned, to refile that application, essentially giving all applicants a second opportunity, so long as the application that is refiled is subject to certain restrictions. Namely, under our proposal, applicants would only be able to refile for the same commercial cannabis activities that they had initially submitted an application for. Any limitations or requirements that are associated with the original application process, they would be subject to. And so, for example, if you needed to be a participant in the social equity program to participate in phase 3 retail round 1, you're still going to need to meet that requirement to go through a refiling process. So it's kind of 3 different conditions we'd allow folks to refile. 1, if you're applying for the same activity. 2, if you're meeting the same requirements that you would have had to have met originally. And 3, so long as you are compliant with the city's land use regulations. But we feel as though this particular recommendation is critically important based on all the feedback that we've received to date, the assumed impact of some of these deadlines, and not allowing folks, trying to create a path that would allow folks an opportunity to move forward. Refiling is that process. And we're hopeful that council will afford all of the applicants that have had their applications abandoned the opportunity to refile. So we're in full support of this concept of refiling. Next, we want to be able to codify the year-long period that an applicant would be able to apply for temporary approval. Right now, it's an uncodified procedure. We are affording applicants the ability to have a year to submit their temporary approval application, but we want to make sure that that doesn't change for some reason. And so we want to make sure that that 1 year period is codified. The intention is to make sure that it stays that way so that it's not further restricted. We've heard from stakeholders about the impact of having too quick of an on-ramp to participate in the application process. And so we want to give folks transparency and predictability and say, so long as you complete your pre-application review process and you go through that process and find a location that is eligible, we'll allow that determination of location compliance to last for a year so that you have a full year and opportunity to apply. And essentially would create a process by which there still would be a path forward after that year expired, but it would essentially require someone to go through the pre-application review process again to either identify that that same location that they had determined was compliant previously is still compliant, or to identify a new location. But we want to codify the one-year temporary approval application process. We think that this is the type of policy that gives applicants predictability and transparency. The department is seeking an amendment specifically to allow applicants to conduct a second review of phase 3 retail round 1 applicants who were previously deemed ineligible due to their proximity to a sensitive use. We are also recommending that the City Council adopt an amendment to the municipal code that would allow businesses to relocate outside of their existing community plan area. Some of the feedback that we heard from stakeholders as we reached out to them about the impact of some of our previously imposed deadlines was that we could change the deadline from December 31st to July 1st, but the reality is that it wasn't so much about the amount of time that folks either had or didn't have, but the scarcity of properties that were compliant with property owners and landowners who were willing to be reasonable and not take advantage of applicants. And so to create additional opportunities and to allow folks to have the opportunity, so long as they are finding compliant property, to essentially address the scarcity of locations that stakeholders have expressed to us as being a barrier. We are recommending that the City Council adopt a policy that would allow folks to relocate outside of their community plan area. I know that this has been a hot button topic over the course of the last several years. We used to allow relocations outright, and then folks said, uh-oh, people are moving too close. That's taking opportunities away from social equity applicants. So the city responded and said, no one can relocate. And I don't think that's stakeholders, social equity applicant, or general applicants alike like that restriction so much. And so we then changed the policy so that people could relocate at least within their community plan area. But again, we're learning from stakeholders that some stakeholders have expressed that that's still a little bit too restrictive, and they're still experiencing a scarcity of locations. One way to strategically address that scarcity is to allow folks to relocate to other community plan areas. This is one of those situations we're going to want to strike a balance, because I also recognize that many council members and other constituents and this department has concerns about undue concentration and businesses being unduly located in any one given community plan area. So the way that we are recommending that the city strategically address this concern is not only by just allowing folks to relocate outside of their community plan area, but essentially part of what we want the city council to do is to amend the definition of undue concentration so that the definition of undue concentration reflects the current number of licenses that are authorized in that particular community plan area. I want to be clear that by doing this, we are not increasing the total number of businesses that can exist in the city, nor are we seeking to increase the total number of businesses that can exist in any particular community plan area. What we are trying to do, however, is to codify these individual exemptions that have been given to different categories of applicants over time. So when we started this process back in 2017, 2018, and the city was originally defining undue concentration, it set its limit. And I will acknowledge, and I'll say this at least in my personal capacity, I think that those limits were more restrictive than necessary, but I also recognize that we're doing a phased approach. And so we were going to grow and expand with time. But I think even the city council realized that these particular undue concentration caps were set lower than expected, in part because the city council has multiple times exempted specific categories of applicants from a finding of undue concentration. So the city council exempted phase 1 businesses from a finding of undue concentration. It subsequently ended up exempting phase 2 businesses from a finding of undue concentration. When the city council amended policies to allow for an additional 100 phase 3 retail round 1 businesses to be added to phase 3 retail round 1, they exempted the first 100 businesses from a finding of undue concentration. So over the course of the last several years, there have been several categories of exemptions given to different phases of applicants, which has resulted in an undue concentration limit that on paper is here, but in reality, due to these exemptions, is here. And so what we want to be able to do, again, through amending this definition, is not to increase the total number of licenses that are available citywide, at least through this policy. And we also are not trying to increase the number of licenses that would be placed in any particular community plan area. But again, what we want to be able to do is simply codify what the city council has already to date exempted from a finding of undue concentration. Part of the reason why this particular recommendation is important to consider alongside our proposal for businesses to relocate outside of their existing community plan area is because, in part, one particular reason. It has always been my priority, and particularly in managing this department, to try and afford as many applicants an opportunity for licensure as possible within our framework. If we allow businesses to relocate to community plan areas without reassessing and amending our definition of undue concentration, when people move to new community plan areas, it is going to take away capacity for phase 3 retail round 2 and new licenses. Again, if there is not a change to the definition of undue concentration in the way that we talked about, not actually increasing the limit, but codifying the existing limit, if that change is not made and businesses are able to relocate to different community plan areas, we will lose capacity for new licenses. There is a way for us to approach this issue, strike a balance that both allows for the city to maintain its existing limit and effectively allow folks to relocate without displacing individuals or taking away capacity for new licenses. I think that that's the balance that we want to strike. that is the balance that the department is recommending that the city council strike. Again, that is the kind of intention, background behind those two particular policy recommendations. We are also recommending that the city authorize the department to create a standalone entity verification process, essentially a review of equity share documents to happen before someone submits a temporary approval application. We recognize and heard from stakeholders even at the last commission meeting how an earlier determination works an advantage for social equity applicants because, again, there are folks who participate in the application process with no intention of meeting the requirements with hopes to sell or litigate these social equity applicants out of their ownership. And so we are supportive. We are recommending that the city create a standalone entity verification process. The last recommendation that we've made that's included in our report essentially would allow for the aggregation of social equity interests. And to kind of put this plainly, to date, the code is required that one individual social equity applicant meet the eligibility criteria and have the requisite equity share ownership percentage, whether it be 33 1/3% or 51%. Those are the minimum required percentages. But what we are recommending, and this is in line with what some other jurisdictions have considered as well, but essentially allows for cooperative economic models where one or more social equity applicants can aggregate their ownership shares to meet a combined total of whatever the specific ownership percentage requirement is. So you may have, let's say that the equity share requirement is 51%. You may be able to identify 4 applicants who have 10%, who are social equity applicants who have 10% of the license, and 1 social equity applicant who had 11% of the license. And together, those 5 equity owners would be able to aggregate their social equity interests and meet qualifications under the program. We recognize that this is a means primarily for equity applicants to essentially raise additional capital by being able to aggregate their ownership interests and to not take on all 51% of the equity share requirements if they wanted to structure a business that way. So it's permissive, it doesn't require for aggregation, but we've heard and through our own, again, experiences, believe that this aggregation would be beneficial to social equity applicants. Again, 9 recommendations in total. Our position is that while we want to see these recommendations amended, we're fully supportive of these recommendations. For us, it's not the amendments, our recommendations or the motion. All of our recommendations could be amended, and if the specific provisions that we've identified today that are in the proposed motion are not removed, we're still going to see detrimental impacts to our licensing and social equity program. And so I think that, and what we're hopeful is that we can work together with our elected officials, with this body, to either refine these particular amendments, to welcome feedback, continued stakeholder feedback, feedback from our electeds on these particular recommendations, but also on the instructions and the attached draft proposal in the motion. Next slide. And I just discussed our conclusion, but again, our report itself details all of these different pieces, our opinion on the instructions, our opinion on the proposed motions, our own recommendations and are hopeful that we can compromise on making sure that we not only have the policy in place to advance the interests of our licensing and social equity program, but the resources in place to advance these interests. Next slide. So after transmitting this report to council on November 2nd, there was a Plum Committee meeting where the motion was considered, and we did get an opportunity to engage with Plum Committee members and articulate our position on the motion. We did articulate for the Plum Committee members that it was our position that we were hoping that they not advance the motion as written, and that they consider the recommendations made by the department. Ultimately, there was a transmittal letter that came from Plum Committee on November 5th. And this transmittal letter detailed some of the amendments that Plum Committee was interested in considering and moving forward. I just want to quickly summarize those. Next slide. So you're looking at a illustration of the first page of the transmittal letter. And again, if you go to the council file management system and type into the council file tracker 21-1083, you can see all of these documents that are being referenced in today's presentation. But the transmittal letter itself did make several amendments to the motion. So I'll quickly summarize. There are essentially 4 different amendments that the transmittal letter included. It essentially included an amendment that acknowledged, and we do appreciate this acknowledgement, an amendment that acknowledged that the DCR has not received the resources that were referenced in the original motion, essentially the $22 million. There was an amendment to the language of the motion, essentially acknowledged that we haven't yet received those resources, but that we expect that these resources are forthcoming. So we appreciate that acknowledgement. It also included an amendment to clarify the commencement of timelines. It included an amendment to allow DCR to conduct entity verification or equity share review before a temporary approval application is submitted. So one of our recommendations out of 9. And it also included an amendment, essentially a new instruction for the department to report back regarding the resources necessary for us to effectuate these proposed policy changes. And I appreciate that the instruction includes a report back on these resources, because there are in fact resources that will be necessary, not only for us to meet the proposed changes in this particular motion, but as I mentioned previously, there are new application processes that we'll be administering in 2022, namely CEQA and our annual licensing process, that will also require additional resources being infused into the department's operations. Next slide. So we recognize that there have been amendments made through the transmittal letter. And while we appreciate the amendments that have been made, they still don't, in our opinion, in the department's opinion, meet or address the concerns that were raised in our October 29th report. Next slide. So I want to just quickly get to the bottom line here, because again, for commissioners, I don't know how quickly this is going to move through council. I'm hopeful that the department will have an opportunity to have our position and our recommendations considered in front of other committees that this particular motion has been assigned to. Again, we don't necessarily know that we'll be afforded that opportunity, but as folks who are responsible for advising the city have a responsibility and duty to advise the city on its cannabis policies and programs. Here's our bottom line. It's the department's position that the motion, even as amended, still contains provisions that will individually and collectively cause more harm than good. As such, the department is asking City Council to oppose the amended motion unless the specific provisions that we've identified in our report and today are removed. It's our position that collectively these provisions eliminate critical oversight and undermine key components of our licensing and regulatory structure and the social equity program. We are and have been coordinating with stakeholders and policymakers and applicants to take action as necessary to improve our processes, to create processes that are more expeditious, more predictable, more transparent. But it's our position that if it was a intervention that council members were seeking, this is not the type of intervention that stakeholders are asking for or would be beneficial to social equity applicants. But we do feel as though, on balance, the recommendations that we've put forward in our report do a better job of addressing those impediments that have been identified by social equity applicants. As such, we are asking and advising City Council to support our recommendations to amend the city's cannabis policies consistent with our recommendations in our October 29th report. Next slide. I want stakeholders, our elected officials, and this body to know that the department remains committed to meeting the expectations of City Council and our stakeholders regarding our licensing and social equity program, including being held accountable to application processing timelines. In the same vein, I want to make sure that the department and the rest of the operations that are necessary for a responsible and equitable licensing and social equity program are resourced so that we have sufficient resources to administer these proposed changes and other responsibilities that we are statutorily mandated to oversee. In that vein, the Department of Cannabis Regulation is currently finalizing its analysis of the resources needed to administer the proposed changes and other mandated responsibilities. And we look forward to working with City Council, the mayor, this body, and stakeholders to ensure that the department is appropriately resourced to administer the responsibilities for which it will be held accountable. That concludes the department's policy update in relation to agenda item number 3.
Thank you, Ms. Packer. That was a very detailed discussion on the motion. I know there's been a lot of talk about what's been proposed at the council level, so I really appreciate that update. And I think certainly my fellow commissioners and also those listening in got a lot out of that. I want to open up the floor to deliberations and questions regarding the presentation we just heard. Does anybody want to start? We've Vice President Mason.
Hi, thank you, President On. Director Packer, thank you for being exceptionally thorough in your presentation and your rebuttal to the recommendations posed by city council, or by that council file rather, not necessarily city council. What leaped out at me was the issue of resourcing, and I got the impression that the city is depending upon the $22 million grant to provide you with resources. Am I correct?
I think that there are assumptions being made. One, that the $22 million is going to be made wholly available. And I want to be clear in articulating that it's a grant application. We have to apply for every single dollar that we're eligible for. We're confident, and I'm confident because of the quality of my team and because of the work that we've done thus far, that we will be able to secure a maximum award, but I want to be frank in articulating that that's not guaranteed.
And thank you for that. My reason for asking that question is because I'm concerned about sustainability. It just seems not the most sound policy to rely on grant funding to resource your department. That's something I think that should be done internally by the city. Is there a gap plan while we wait for you to apply for the funding and to resource your department?
So thank you for the question, Vice President Mason. As I had mentioned previously, this particular motion and our corresponding documents have been referred to Budget and Finance Committee. We're hopeful that if we actually have an opportunity to be heard in Budget and Finance Committee, that we would have an opportunity to articulate some of the resources that would be necessary to administer these processes. But I agree with you, Vice President Mason. The reality is that this particular grant is a one-time funding. It's one-time funding. And the reality is that the state of California isn't saying use this grant money to do whatever you want to do. They have specific objectives that we have to meet in order to utilize these dollars, and namely, what the state of California is providing these grant dollars to local jurisdictions for is for the facilitation of CEQA compliance and the facilitation of transitioning provisional license holders at the state level through the state's annual licensing process. Now, because our process was designed with the state requirements in mind, I think that we'll naturally be able to meet some of those objectives simultaneously. But the reality is, and this is going to be evident in the budget request that we submit this year, and I do want to articulate all of the general managers in the process of finalizing their budget requests. The city's budget process lasts all year. We're actually, all of the general managers are submitting, they're required to submit our budget proposals by the 19th of November, next Friday, right? But these resources that we're requesting on November 19th, even when decided, aren't going to be made available to departments until July 1st at the top of the next fiscal year.
Yeah.
So the reality is that we will be requesting resources from both the city and the state of California. I mean, in order to do what one is already expected of us, and then what is going to the expansion of expectations, we're going to need to see a real tangible investment in our licensing program, in our social equity program, and also in the city's enforcement strategy. All of these things are going to impact our overall framework and our economic output. So I appreciate the question, Vice President Mason, because it is going to be important for us to be deliberate about resourcing the department, but also making sure that those resources are sustainable and that will necessitate an investment, not just from the state, but from the city's coffers as well.
So then, last question. Thank you for your answers so far. Based on your current resources, how successful would you be at meeting these requirements?
Based on our current resources, we'd be set up to fail if these processes were administered without an additional allocation of resources. That's just the bottom line. The department would be set up to fail if these particular deadlines and this was just about the deadlines. There are other requirements that don't even have to do with consideration of time. But what we've learned, Vice President Mason, throughout our experience in this process, in particular in dealing with COVID-19, is that there are certain situations which are out of our control. And we also can't control the number of licenses that we get in a particular day. Over the course of the last several months, I've had staff who have gotten sick, who have needed to take time off. We've had folks, because of the city's COVID crisis, who stepped away from their day-to-day responsibilities and were asked to be disaster services workers. So we had folks who were supposed to be doing licensing work, who were helping, being at sites around the city, making sure that folks get their vaccines and stuff, because that's part of what our obligation as public servants are. But on any given day, when we have competing priorities and a higher volume of applications, it's going to compromise our ability to meet the deadlines. So it's not a kind of perfect formula because it will vary depending on what our resources are and what the volume of applications are. But today, if this was to be implemented today with our current resources, and we have vacancies with existing positions, right?
Right.
We would not be able to guarantee that we meet these deadlines, and the fiscal and kind of legal implication associated with that, Vice President Mason, is if we put ourselves in a situation where we do fail because we're unable to meet a deadline, then we're at risk of litigation. And then there becomes additional financial costs associated with the liability that we take on if we're unable, if someone sues us for not meeting what we are statutorily obligated to do.
Okay, understood. Thank you. You've answered my question. I will yield the space to someone else.
Commissioner Nara?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Vice President. I noticed this is also a reflection on our prior meeting, but I just sense that, the issue is really, I know that Director Packer, you and your department have done everything to educate city council members, their staff, met with them. The issue is how much of it are they really trying to understand? Because I think, when these kind of motions come forward in city council and pushed by the council members, the first thing I feel is they really don't know how it works, the process of licensing, the inner workings of the department, what we're going through, what we're trying to fix, because we do take proactive steps, as you and your department have done, to improve the delivery and the services. And is there a way now, because I feel like this motion is moving forward, but we could maybe figure out a strategy to pause it and have dialogue with the council members and their staff to explain and address some of the concerns, because I share a lot of the same concerns that you have and your department has about what we're gonna the consequences would be very negative, and we will harm the community we're trying to help with our licensing process and our services, and how they can maybe stop the process of moving forward the motion, but try to engage more in learning about more about learn more the details of the services that we do, where maybe improvements can happen, and why moving forward that motion is not the best strategy and it's not the best approach. I'm concerned we're going to cause more harm to the social equity applicants in the final outcome if we move forward with this. And I am concerned about the resources because I've seen every meeting with your report from your staff, but since it's a lot of work being done by your staff that definitely has capacity issues right now. And regardless of this motion, I think we do need to address the resource problem, but especially because the city council is trying to move forward with this motion, that we really need to bring it more to the forefront. So how can that be possible as next steps, and what role can we play as commissioners to help you in that process?
The benefit of the council members and the authors who introduced the motion, I do think that initially they were trying to respond to the feedback that they heard from stakeholders about how this could move forward more quickly, right? And so I think that that's the driver behind this. I think part of what is going to be necessary, and I take responsibility for the engagement and some of the lack of engagement that some council offices have had. I think the reality is, and we've acknowledged this on the record, we've acknowledged this with council offices, but we have critical deficiencies in our communication staff right now. And I think a lot of this is a communications issue. I was surprised when the motion was introduced, at least initially, because again, we collectively as a city just went through this process over the summer to address this. And it seemed like there were some pieces that got lost in translation where probably many stakeholders didn't get to see immediately what the results of all of those effectuated changes were. And so council, in trying to service their constituents, said, we're going to step in. They essentially said, it's time for a cannabis intervention, right? And I agree. I think that it is time for a cannabis intervention. I think it's time for us to get our city council engaged and revved up about everything that's going on in terms of cannabis and cannabis policy, because it's generating economic input, it's allowing folks to have opportunities to advance. And so I welcome the intervention, but it's how we're going about that intervention that concerns me, and I think is of concern to social equity applicants. And so I do think, as long as there's time and willingness, right? And I don't know how much time we have, but I can tell you on the department side, there is complete willingness to sit at the table alongside stakeholders, alongside this body, alongside our electeds, and say, this is where we want to go. Let's resolve how we're collectively going to get there. The reality in terms of timing is that it's already November. Council will be going on recess the next month. And so I think part of the decision that needs to be made, and this is a decision that council will make, is this something that they're going to try and resolve and quickly get done before they go on recess? One, because if so, then we need to have immediate deliberations about all of these issues. If not, and there is an intention to move this through the process, have things get adopted in the new year, then I think we have a little bit more time. But I also recognize that some of the recommendations, some of the issues really do need to be addressed today. They should have been addressed a while ago. And part of our responsibility is trying to figure out what of these different strategies is going to be politically palpable for certain folks, given all of the different interests that many of our electeds have. But based on my conversation with social equity applicants, particularly many of the folks who showed up today, they want urgency. They just don't want this motion. They just don't want what they view are going to be the impacts of the motion. So I want to be able to stand with community and council members and saying we urgently need a cannabis intervention, but it's the how we go about doing that where we're going to need to get into the weeds, and that's our business. right? And that's my point, is that like getting into the weeds about these impacts, literally my business. And I have concerns about the way that some of this language would impact applicants. Again, at the end of the day, our job is to advise and administer, and regardless of what policies get adopted, the Department of Cannabis Regulation will be at the ready to do our best to administer the policies as we always have, regardless of what the resources are. But in order for our applicants to be in a position to be successful, I think it's in the city's collective best interest to position the department to similarly be successful.
Thank you very much. And please, I think I speak on behalf of my colleagues on the commission, but keep us in mind as you move forward and try to figure out the next steps. We're willing to help you in any way, because this is heavy stuff you're dealing with right now, and we are coming across the deadline next month for the recess, and my hope is that they will think it through and put a pause on this to engage in dialogue. But anyway, let us know how we can be helpful.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Gnarl. I appreciate it. I want to be able to continue to work with this body to make sure that we get it right. But as you mentioned, there are many different implications associated with our programming. And it's these types of policy changes that I think have these far-ranging unintended consequences. And so we just want to be thoughtful about that. We know that these are the types of things that are going to impact, for example, our ability to make sure that folks are complying with labor requirements and corporate social responsibility requirements and hiring requirements. We don't know who the owners are. We're not going to be able to do that successfully. I'll acknowledge that there's a lot more infrastructure that needs to be built to do it better. But I'd be remiss if we walked away from the infrastructure that we created to date in the name of expediency. So I appreciate the offer of partnership, Commissioner Gnarl, and I look forward to it.
Commissioner Villa.
Thank you, Commissioner On. My concern from what I've heard today is that the implementation of this order as it stands, given the way it was amended through the transmittal letter process, would also almost result in something that is worse than what we have now. And it is, I guess what I really want to know is how can we effectively make that information known to the individual council members so that they don't proceed with the motion as it stands with the amendments in the transmittal letter. I mean, what is our plan? What is our best plan of attack for expressing this? I mean, you've written, all of this information to them and somehow it didn't get incorporated. 1 out of 9 points made it, and the other 8 are very important. So I just want to know what can we do at this juncture? What is our most effective path, or what is the plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Villa. I think that for stakeholders who are listening to this and who have an interest, regardless of whether or not your position is aligned with the department, or if your position is aligned with the motion, or certain positions are aligned with either, I think it's going to be important for stakeholders to articulate how this will impact them. Because again, I think that council members, if you look at the language of the motion, like they're purporting to do this in the name of social equity applicants. I think it's going to require social equity applicants articulating on the record, this isn't for me. This is not the type of policy amendment that is going to advance my interests. But these particular recommendations or these particular issues are of interest. I think that this is one of those issues. This is one of those times where it is going to be important for folks to be engaged in the process. I'm appreciative that it hasn't moved so quickly that it's moved through council already. So we have an opportunity like today to use this as a forum to get additional input. But Commissioner Villa, we are going to be having, and I know we haven't released the agenda yet, but we have a regularly scheduled commission meeting next week on the 18th. And so this body could request that an item be placed on the agenda for the next commission meeting so that this body could take a position on the motion or on the department's recommendations. If the question is, what can this body do to participate in advising the city council on this motion and the department's recommendations, I want to remind commissioners that this body could agendize a vote on this matter.
Yeah, Ms. Packer, I think that is a great suggestion. That's something that I was going to suggest, is that this body entertain a motion. We can agendize it for the next hearing. I do believe that the time is right. One of our main functions is to advise both the mayors and the city council as to policy and changes such as what's before us. And I think it's wholly appropriate that we do take an official action on the record and make those recommendations to the city council. I think, and so I want to see what my fellow commissioners think about that suggestion. If so, I'd like to direct staff at this time to go ahead and agendize that for the next hearing. Any comments?
This is Vice President Mason. I'm in complete agreement.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Villa, and absolutely, that was what I was trying to get to, is that I think we need to take a formal position, and I think it needs to be taken expeditiously. So, yes.
Okay, great. So
please, so this is a formal request then to put that on the next agenda.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm seeing yeses all around. So staff, if we can go ahead and get that on the next agenda, and we can have a further discussion about what that language looks like, but we should go ahead and take a position on this. Just general comments that I had, the council motion, let's put aside the substance of it. I think, certainly it comes from the right place. It's well-intentioned. Ms. Packer, you had mentioned this cannabis intervention, the notion of this cannabis intervention, and I agree, I welcome it. And I firmly believe that as a result of this exercise that we're going through, we're going to end up much stronger and have a much more efficient and effective system that is actually working for the very applicants we're here to protect and ensure their success. And that really hasn't happened to date on a number of levels, just a lot of the delays that we've heard about from time and time again. But one thing that it's clear to me is that these decisions cannot be made in a vacuum. There's a lot of moving parts as I'm been realizing, the more in depth we get into the process, there's so much going on. And, we've heard the term unintended consequences over and over again. And that was initially my biggest fear and still remains my biggest concern are these unintended consequences that ultimately can hurt the very applicants we're here to serve. And I don't think that's anybody's goal here, right? The goal is to the contrary. And I do believe we all want the same thing, which is figuring out how to improve the system and make sure that it's effective and efficient for all of our applicants that are in the process. And I think we have that opportunity here. And I really appreciate how you've broken down and dissected the various provisions in the proposed motion, your rebuttals, and it was very well presented. So really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the feedback. We had some callers, from the various applicants that had called in as well. And so it's clear, I think, that you've had some engagement with some of these folks, and we're hearing a lot of the same sentiments being echoed. And there's been a lot of concern that's been voiced from the applicant community regarding some of the proposed provisions in this motion. And that says a lot, and it means a lot, because it's the applicants themselves that are going to be affected by this, and they should have a say and input into the process. And so for all the applicants that are listening out there, all the stakeholders, please continue to stay engaged. This is a critical point in the process. We have an opportunity to effectuate change, but it has to be done in the right way. So continue to provide us and the various agencies of the city, the council, with your input, because you are helping to educate us as to what direction to go, what changes need to be implemented or what shouldn't be implemented. But all of that feedback is so valuable for us to hear. And so really appreciate those callers that have called, the various stakeholders that have also taken time to email us with their concerns and their thoughts. All of that is so critical to this process. And then also the department, right? We can't make these kind of wholesale changes without input from the department, the very department that has the task of effectuating all of this. And so that's another concern, given the various, the constraints that we have from a resource perspective. But the other point that I thought was very important, Ms. Packer, that you made is we cannot have a motion that gets passed ultimately that sets up this department for failure. That's not what anybody wants, right? And so we got to make sure that whatever is ultimately passed as part of this motion, that it's something that the department can actually execute on, so that ultimately we are successful. And I think that's going to require a lot more dialogue between, the three parties I see. It's going to be the applicants, the stakeholders, and then you've got the department, and then you've got the council. And so I just want to encourage, all of us to continue the dialogue and make sure that we ultimately arrive at the right place. Because the risk of these unintended consequences is real. Look no further than this restriction on relocations. We cannot relocate retail outside of the community plan. And I think that change was initially instituted to protect social equity applicants that already planted the flag. But, fast forward to today, and now because of this restriction, those same social equity applicants that we try to protect are negatively impacted by this, right? That's just an example of how, some of these things initially seem right, but we have to think it all the way through. Look at the bigger picture and see ultimately what is truly the best pathway forward. And so, but like I said, I'm very optimistic, more than I've ever been, especially with the recent changes that we've implemented. I feel like they're working. I think if we look back at this several months from now, I think we're going to see a lot of substantial improvement and change that's really for the benefit of our applicants. So very excited about that. But this is an opportunity for us, for all of us. So let's seize the day, and really the communication is going to be so critical here. So let's continue to talk to one another. And on the next hearing, we'll go in and take an official action specifically with regard to this proposed motion.
Okay, President On?
Yes, Commissioner Villa, go ahead.
I just want to be sure that we cover 2 points. We requested that, a motion go on to the next agenda. And I would think that motion would relate to the 8 points that got left out and weren't properly addressed. But as important as that is the point that Vice President Mason made related to the funding. And if because for legal reasons, that needs to be a separate item on the agenda, then I want to be sure that there are 2 items on the agenda: the consideration of the 8 points and the funding that Vice President Mason raised, the issue related to the funding. I don't want us, because of improper wording of the agenda, not get to address both items, which are very important. So thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Villa. We can make sure in my recommendation, we may need to kind of categorize it to include 3 things. But I'd like to ask that this body take a position not only on our recommendations, but on the motion as amended, because as articulated, we could adopt all of the recommendations, but it's our position that if the motion is adopted as written, there are going to still be these unintended consequences. And so I'm sure we can work with our city attorneys to make sure that we have language broad enough or specific enough to make sure we're covering all of those items. But I think it's going to be important to consider not just the department's recommendations, but what's still on the table in the motion as amended from Plum and the budget consideration. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other comments or questions before we sign off?
No, I just wanna thank you, Director Packer, and your staff. I know we didn't hear from the staff today because it's consumed us this item, but I do want to thank you all for all the work that you do every day. And we can always, no matter how well we try to implement something, there's always room for improvement. And I think you and your staff have been thoughtful in trying to figure out how to improve the services. And so I just want to recognize that and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. With that, let's go ahead and I'm going to adjourn this meeting. The time now is 5:08. Thank you everyone for your participation.